YouTube. I'm going to make a little video today of kind of a two-part sort of thing. I have a really small DVD update that I want to do where there's a few things I've purchased within the last week or so that I'll kind of show off. But because it was so small, I wanted to give you something a little bit more, and I'm starting to think of things like top fives and different kinds of things that are already in my collection that I can show for different reasons or another, just to keep me productive and making more videos on this channel. So I thought about, since Valentine's Day has come and gone, I thought about my top 5 romantic comedies, or specifically romance-themed movies. I'll do my DVD update first, since I don't have a lot to show off, and there's one purchase in there that'll segue very nicely into my top 5 favorite romantic movies, romance-themed movies. So I'll just show off just the last couple things I've bought, not a lot, and I won't spend too much time on those so that I can devote more time to the to my top 5. So stick around. First of all, I want to show I bought a little movie here that came out last year that I don't think a lot of people saw, but a lot of people should check out if they're kind of into experimental independent film, and it's a movie called The Future. Written and directed by a performance artist named Miranda July. Now, she's done one other movie before called Me, You, and Everyone Else You Know. I think that's, yeah, Me, You, and Everyone Else We Know. She's only made 2 films so far, but both are very, very good. And this one she just released last year. It was kind of a Sundance hit. Very odd, very quirky, sort of a breakup movie of sorts. Has to do with human relationships, but has a lot more to do with other things too, like just sort of the early, or the late 20s, early 30s kind of mindset of you know, our culture's moving so fast, everything's kind of by the minute, that we feel like if we're not successful by a certain age, that we might as well be retiring, or we might as well be dead. And so it has a lot to do with that kind of mentality too. But there's a lot of strange stuff in this movie. She is a conceptual artist, so she brings in a lot of those kind of motifs. The movie gets pretty surreal at one point. The movie is narrated by a cat. And that's actually not the weirdest thing that goes on in this movie, but it is very good and very insightful, and if you're open to it, pretty touching as well. Now, recently, a local a local music store in my town named Budget Tapes and Records just announced they were going out of business, and a moment of silence for Budget Tapes and Records. This is a shop that I used to frequent often, very often, especially when I was a teenager and I was very heavily into music. I would go in there practically once, twice, 3 times a week to buy used CDs. It was very, very into music, almost as into movies as I am now. At one point I was into music, and I collected a lot of CDs, and I got to know the staff very well, and now they're going out of business, and I'm very, very sad about it, because it's a small town and we don't have a lot of things like that, independently owned record stores. So I went through their movie collection. I bought a bunch of records too, vinyl, because I'm one of those kind of guys, and because they have a half-off sale going on right now. But I did go through their movies a little bit and picked out a few that I didn't already have in my collection. I thought were a little interesting. I have a documentary here called Capturing the Friedmans, which is a very disturbing, very uneasy movie to watch. It has to do with a computer teacher in the late 80s, early 90s, who was eventually discovered as being a pedophile, and the case, his trial, and all of that kind of stuff. All these different weird perspectives on this man and his family, and how they kind of protected him even though they knew what was going on. It's very strange. It's very interesting kind of look into this, but it's very dark and not easy to watch. But I thought it was a kind of a strange find for that kind of record store, so I picked it up. But I don't know how often I'll actually watch this, because it gives me the oogies. I blind bought this movie. I've never seen it before, but I've heard nothing but good things, and I've almost bought it a lot, so I decided why not. It was really cheap, so I bought this movie called In the Bedroom, which is directed by Todd Field. I have one other movie that he did called Little Children, and I really, really like that movie a lot, so I'm hoping that this one, which he did before that movie, will be just as good or as interesting. So I'll have to give you more information on that after I watch it. A classic comedy that they had that it's always been one of my favorites, and stars two actors I really like sort of at their prime. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. I won't say much about this. You know, it's a con artist comedy, classic. Steve Martin and Michael Caine, really good stuff, and directed by Frank Oz, who's a good sort of dark comedy writer director. So, you know, pretty excited about that. Lastly, I said I had something that'll kind of segue nicely into my top 5 romance. Now, this is actually not on my list, but you know, probably would be in my top 15. And I just recently bought the Diamond edition of Lady and the Tramp on Blu-ray and DVD combo. This is one that I really, really like, and it's kind of different for Disney, I think. It's sort of, especially at that time, because a lot of their stuff was based on fairy tales or folk tales or legends that have been going on for a long time. You know, stories like Cinderella, Pinocchio, Snow White, all of these kind of things. And then you have this movie, which is kind of a completely original idea based upon these two dogs from two different walks of life who come together, and it is kind of basically it's sort of a romantic comedy for kids by Disney, and it's a very well written, well understood kind of movie. If you look at it, it's very much telling of the time that it came out. It came out in the mid-50s, and if you look at a lot of the other Hollywood films that were coming out at that time that weren't musicals anyway, but you know, kind of the romantic comedy and romance pictures that were coming out at that time, this is kind of in that same vein. So I think it's sort of interesting to look at as far as Disney movies at that time, and I think it is really good and really well written and has really solid characters, and I was glad to buy this one. So there's my DVD update for the last few things that I bought, and I'll go in now to my top 5 romance-themed movies. Now, I'm a nerd who collects movies, so I have not had a ton of romantic luck in my life, and I'm sure that if you're watching this video, you could probably relate. But I'm still a sucker for this type of stuff when done right. Now, there's a lot of it that's horrible and awful, and I don't even want to talk about Katherine Heigl or Kristen Bell or some of those other kind of crappy modern romantic comedies that are just practically unwatchable. But, you know, growing up, I was sort of a Nora Ephron fan and that kind of stuff. Watched Sleepless in Seattle and You Got Mail and those kind of things growing up when I was a kid. And so I had an early taste. I grew up with sisters and that kind of stuff, so I had an early taste for romance and romantic-themed movies and romantic comedies, especially. And I think that, you know, when done right, it can actually be a very fun, enjoyable genre. And there's a specific kind of romantic comedy that I really seem to gravitate towards. And probably not surprisingly, most of these movies that I'll show sort of come from the male perspective, even though that they do have to do with relationships and gender relations and those kind of things. They are a little bit more male-dominated in a certain way, and I think I'll let the movies speak for themselves. So this is my official top 5 romance-themed movies, and a lot of times when I'm feeling depressed or lonely, I suppose, I'll kind of turn to these movies and just kind of cuddle up in my wallowing in pity and just watch those. So if you have a top 5 of those kind of movies specifically for that kind of mood, let me know in the comments below what it is for you. Now, the first movie I want to show, number 5 on my list, is Adam Sandler's The Wedding Singer. Now, I think that, without a doubt, hands down, this has to be the best Happy Madison production ever done. The best Adam Sandler comedy. Not the best comedy that Adam Sandler's ever been in, but the best movie that he's been a producer of and comes out of his canon. I think this movie has a lot of heart and a lot of sincerity, and it has a certain amount of effort in the storytelling and in the characters and the relationships that doesn't really show in most of his other productions, especially lately in the last 10 years. This production company's just gone down the hole really fast. But this, I think, is the peak of him as an actor and that production company, and I really love this movie. And the music is great, and it takes place in the 80s, obviously, 85, something like that. So that's a great 80s soundtrack, and it's not just used in an MTV kind of pepper-in hits to roll the thing along, but it actually, the music is thematic and plays very well into the movie, and in a lot of ways actually helped me sort of define a lot of those songs to a specific mood or atmosphere that I couldn't really appreciate because I wasn't really a part of that era. But yeah, I love this movie, and I know I'm not the only one. My number 4, I guess, is a little bit of a cheat because it's more of a breakup movie. Actually, kind of a lot of these are, but you know what I said in my intro. But it's always been one of my favorite movies, and it is Chasing Amy by Kevin Smith. It came out in 1997, part 3 in his Jersey trilogy, if you will. The only movie the Criterion Collection's ever released by him, and I love this movie to death. I think it's the only movie he's done, Kevin Smith, where I'd say it's a perfect film, where nothing in it needs to be changed, where there isn't some stuff that goes on a little bit too long, or some characters that aren't as well defined, or some jokes that he thinks are more funny than they really are. I think this is a great movie. It has a very kind of melancholy sort of tone to it, but I love this movie a lot. And, it's one that I turn back to a lot, and I'd say without a doubt this is the best that Kevin Smith has ever produced, and I know I'm not alone in that opinion too. Much to his chagrin, I think he actually sort of resents this movie because people always point this out as being his best film. Now this is a movie I saw when I was really, really young, and it kind of helped whet my palate for romantic comedy in general, and it was always kind of my bar for what a good romantic comedy is. And it has an interesting structure, and it is When Harry Met Sally, which is directed by Rob Reiner and co-written by Rob Reiner and Nora Ephron, who I spoke of earlier. And they kind of co-wrote this thing together, and both of their personalities are in this, as well as a ton of Woody Allen, which I didn't really realize till I got older and started watching a lot of Woody Allen movies, how much this movie really rips him off. But it's still a great movie, and there's some great performances in there. This is, in my opinion, sort of the beginning of the modern romantic comedy to a lot. I mean, there was the 50s and the 60s kind of romantic comedy, sort of the ideal romantic comedy, and then it was kind of filtered through and subverted by Woody Allen, and then I think these guys here really kind of set it as a standard for how it can be presented in the mainstream again, and now it is degraded down to Katherine Heigl comedies, but I digress. I still think this is a great movie, one of the highlights of the 80s for sure, and definitely the highlight of both of these actors' careers. Great movie. Now, speaking of Woody Allen, my number 2 favorite romantic comedy or romance-themed movie is Annie Hall. This is definitely my favorite Woody Allen movie of all time, and I think, I mean, it's been ripped off over and over and over again. This theme of showing a relationship and showing it out of order, doing the structure kind of strange. I mean, even When Harry Met Sally did that a little bit. 500 Days of Summer kind of does that, where they show the beginning of the relationship, the end of the relationship, and juxtapose the two. Blue Valentine did that most recently. There's an episode of Scrubs that does this. This movie really invented it, and there's just some great lines in here, great dialogue, and very funny stuff, and ultimately very touching and heartwarming too. And I think it has a very honest, through its comedy, brings out a lot of honesty in relationships. And I mean, it's, come on, Oscar winner, 1977. Can't go wrong with Annie Hall. My favorite romance-themed movie of all time, a romantic comedy, if you will, is High Fidelity, going back to independent record stores, I guess. really good movie, also kind of Woody Allen-esque in a lot of ways, and definitely from the male perspective. But I think this is, without a doubt, not only one of my favorite movies of all time, but definitely my favorite romantic comedy of all time. And it deals with relationships and sort of the existential male dilemma of dealing with breakups. I think I'm not the only one, and definitely not, the writers. Nick Hornby was the writer of the novel, which was a British story, and they translated it to America when they made the movie with John Cusack. But he really goes into the idea of that once you've been broken up with, your brain kind of goes back to all your past relationships, and you start to try and connect the dots and see, how does it keep happening? Why is this all repeating? Why am I just living the same story over and over again? And obviously that's not really the way it is, but that's the way a lot of guys, I think, particularly think about it. And this movie captures that perfectly and does it in a really fun and inventive way. And on the backdrop of all the romantic comedy stuff, there's this whole thing about music, and I'm doing a top 5 right now, and I'm pretty sure that this movie invented that concept, and now it's just kind of in the pop vernacular. But all the characters are sort of pop culture freaks, and this came out in the 90s when that sort of thing was popular in movies, amongst 20-somethings that talk about movies and music. But this did it in a much less pretentious way. They sort of present these characters as sort of socially inept to a certain point, so they don't try and present it as they're so cool because they know all this pop culture, although it kind of works on that level too. They present it more as like they're obsessed to the point of damaging their social lives, and it's really funny. I think this was kind of a star-making role for Jack Black, who's sort of a supporting character in this, and all of the stuff that takes place in the record store is just hilarious, and it's really, really funny and really, really heartwarming, and actually pretty profound to some extent, and I think kind of plays upon the Woody Allen neuroses, male-driven romantic comedy concept probably better than any other movie that I can think of outside of Woody Allen. So love it to death, and this is my #1 romance theme movie. So like I said, leave a comment below or leave your list in the top 5. You could do a video response, those are always welcome, and tell me what you thought of either my DVD update, any of the movies I talk about there, or my top 5 romance theme movies. So thanks for watching.